Hi, Brit.
Hi, Christian.
Welcome to the Superhuman Mind channel. Today we're going to talk about Peter Pan syndrome.
Yeah. So the Peter Pan syndrome, which I also like to call the little prince or little princess syndrome when it occurs in adulthood, because it doesn't just apply to men but also to women. It's basically it's not a condition that occurs in DSM, but it's a syndrome that is well described in various literature. And it's basically a case where the mind does not catch up with the body in some sense, in an age sense. So the mind of the person is much younger than the biological age of the person. And and that means that the person tends to behave the way that the mind dictates. So it could be a 40-year-old man who behaves like a 15-year-old boy, or a 50-year-old woman who behaves like a 25-year-old woman.
In the social context, right?
Yeah, so it's not typically, it's not always affecting them in terms of performing jobs and so on. So that's partially why it's not included in DSM, but it is more like as you say, in social contexts. So it could be, so an example could be that um, you're 25, but you're still completely into, like, you know, little toy cars and Legos, and all you do is like play with Legos and toy cars, and and you want to go out and fly your kite, and so that could be an example of it. But it could also be, a 50-year-old man who likes to go out clubbing every day with his 20-year-old friends. So that, but of course it takes more than that, right? Because you could be, a 50-year-old man who's out clubbing every day without having the Peter Pan syndrome. It also requires that you're generally immature in your social life and in your social actions.
And
So,
and so in what way? In selfishness or
childhood form of selfishness. So it tends to come together with a form of narcissism, and I don't mean the diagnostic disorder, but more sort of egocentrism, uh, in that sense. But narcissism in the sense that you also see in little children. So little children and, well, and young adults, right? They're adolescents. They're just more selfish because they're not sort of fully, even if they have a sense of empathy, they haven't fully developed a complete sense of empathy. So it's not like every teenager, even though they might behave in selfish ways, it's not like they're going to grow up and become narcissists. It's that's part of the development, and that's a kind of narcissism that you see in the Peter Pan syndrome. So it also tends to come along with that sort of fear of commitment, but not just commitment to relationships. It's fear of commitment to things that are adult responsibilities. So one person commenting on the post on Psychology Today that we had up a little while ago, said that her son was behaving that way, and in his case, he couldn't hold up a job, sort of out of a kind of like, did not want that commitment, did not want the house, even though he was almost 30 years old, and so didn't make money, and so she had a problem sort of would. She couldn't get herself to actually kick him out of the house because he didn't have a job. So he sort of just lived at home using their resources, the parents' resources, or the mom's resources.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this fear of commitment, but commitment in all areas of life, not just relationship commitments.
And do you think that is there some event or something that triggers that, or is it a nature or nurture type of issue?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. It's definitely seen more often when there's a mother that pampers her son or daughter, because of course it could be women as well. So a mom or a primary caregiver that very sort of pampers the boy or girl and does not give the boy or girl any responsibilities. So, and also never really criticizes the child. Well, criticism might be the wrong word here, but corrects the child's behavior, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't mean it has to be one of those free range parenting situations where kids are just like running around all over town. It's just more like a case where the parents has some reason for not correcting the child's behavior. Let's say that the child chews with her mouth open, right? The parent is not going to tell the child not to do that. But it could still be a strict parent in the sense that, no, you have to be home at 8 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just like free range parenting that does it. It's more like the kind of parenting where there is a reason for not correcting certain kinds of behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a correlation between parents who do that, and it's seen a lot in the case of single mothers and their sons. So that's the case where it's a man that's immature.
Mm-hmm.
So single moms and the sons, if they are single children, and it's also single mom, it becomes this kind of situation. Perhaps the mother is afraid of losing something, not just sort of losing the child, because there might not be anything to lose there, but losing the child's admiration or something like that. So that's one thing that can cause it. But of course, it's not really that well studied. It's discussed in social psychology, but it's not well examined in terms of research. So it's not fully clear what actually causes it. So do you have any people in your circle of acquaintances, very broad circle of acquaintances, so we don't identify anyone that satisfies this?
I mean, I think I might. I think what. So you mentioned a little bit about narcissism, and I mean, can you? What's the? How do you tell the difference between whether somebody's a narcissist or was a little princess?
There are overlaps. I would say that the little princess or Peter Pan does not necessarily have that sense of, oh, I am so much intellectually greater than everyone else, mm-hmm. right? So there is this inflated ego in the real narcissist, the one with narcissistic personality disorder, where they genuinely make themselves believe that their accomplishments are so much greater than they really are.
Mm.
And for the little princess, that doesn't have to be the case. There's still a sense of entitlement, a feeling of entitlement. But if you were to ask the little princess or the little prince, or Peter Pan, if, let's say, they actually managed to keep up a job, and if you ask them, oh, are you doing a lot better than your colleagues, they may not say that they're doing better than their colleagues. Whereas the narcissist, the full-blown narcissist, will be, well, yeah, obviously the best one in my department or in my office, or so there's definitely that difference between the two. Also, the one with narcissistic personality disorder does not necessarily behave like someone who's a lot younger. So there is that aspect to it, that it is this need to be younger than you are, psychological need, not necessarily the way that people don't want to, get old in terms of their bodies, but psychologically they don't want to grow up.
Okay.
They're basically people who don't want to grow up, right? To the full set of responsibilities that it takes in order to be a grown-up. So that's, I would say, is the difference.
And then what about, in terms of outperforming colleagues and things like that? I mean, do narcissists tend to be more closeted about it, or are they more open about being? I mean, would they tell you that, oh yeah, of course I'm doing well at work, or is it more of an internal monologue?
Well, that can vary, of course, but in the really strong cases, you actually have them say something about how they perceive others and how they perceive themselves. So they perceive others. It's actually kind of a perceptual disorder, or an aspect of narcissistic personality disorder is actually a perceptual disorder, because they perceive others as inferior, unless they're clearly not inferior. So let's take the educational system here at University of Miami, right? So, and let's say that I had full-blown narcissistic personality disorder, then I would not think of the president of University of Miami as inferior to me. But people who would be on a par with me, so other people who had the same position or similar position, and published the same, and so on, I would still think of them as inferior.
Okay.
And then think of people who publish less as even more inferior to me. So I might express that, or I might not express that if I were a narcissistic person in the full-blown sense.
But in the Peter Pan syndrome, do people tend to express that, or?
No, they tend not to see that there is a problem. It's of course that can probably vary as well, but they don't see that it's a problem necessarily. Of course, in the extreme cases where people can't keep up a job and so on, they might realize that there is a problem there. But if they're able to maintain a job, and it's mostly in their social life, so you can imagine the 40-year-old office worker whose only friends, not that you can't have friends who are 20 years old, but the only friends that he has, they're say 20, half his age, right? That would be a sign. That's it's not sufficient, of course, but it's a sign that the person is identifying with that age group.
And is that something that comes and goes? I mean, does it tend to be a kind of a developmental disorder that you have throughout your life, or is it something that can appear, for example, during a divorce in your middle ages, or I mean, could that?
Similarities to the midlife crisis, if that's what you have in mind.
Yeah.
Certainly, there are some similarities there. It could be, since it's not in DSM, it's not clear exactly how to define it. You can only look at the social psychology articles about it. But it seems that some people who go through a midlife crisis, whether it's after a divorce or not, that they have some of the same features. So it's possible that it's just that when it occurs in midlife, we call it a midlife crisis, and when it occurs when you're 25, we wouldn't call it a midlife crisis, right? Because, I mean, you might be 25 and behave like you're 15. And so we wouldn't call that a midlife crisis. So it may just be that when it does occur in midlife, that we call this Peter Pan syndrome, that we call that a midlife crisis, because a midlife crisis can also take many forms, but one of them, of course, is the stereotypical one where the man or woman sort of has to suddenly behave like they did when they were 20, right? So suddenly they divorce. Take the case of the man, they divorce the woman or their wife and leave the kids, and then they move in with a 19-year-old girl and hang out with her friends and so on. I mean, so of course that's a stereotype, but it does happen. And so it seems like that would probably classify as a kind of Peter Pan syndrome too, except when it does occur in midlife, it's more, we tend to call it midlife crisis. But yeah, so what do you think? Is there a way to distinguish? It's hard to distinguish these things when they're not actually included in the official manual for disorders. But do you think that there's a clear difference between, say, the stereotypical midlife crises and Peter Pan syndrome?
Well, I mean, one distinction might be that I think a lot of times in a midlife crisis, maybe just because of how commonly the term is thrown around, I think that people tend to be aware of it. A lot of people who are going through midlife crisis are aware that they are making lots of drastic changes to their life to try to recapture things they feel like they were inadequate from their youth. Whereas with Peter Pan syndrome, it seems like the people are genuinely unaware that their behavior is abnormal or not, or not part of a systematic lifetime plan. Whereas midlife crisis doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be as extreme as always divorcing your spouse and moving in with people and hanging out with 20-year-olds. A lot of times it can be making a really stupid giant purchase to kind of of something you wanted in your youth, and then taking all the flack from your spouse about it, even though it's like totally acratic. It makes no sense to do it.
And a midlife crisis, I suppose, could also just be a psychological feeling of being uneasy without making any changes to your life, right?
So I would say I probably know some people who, I think everybody knows some people who have that Peter Pan issue.
Yeah, I think I know some people too. They shall be unnamed.
So I'm kind of wondering then, why do because I've mentioned it to my wife and to other people, and when you start reading off the symptoms, people will be like, oh, that's like so and so.
Yeah.
So it's not a desirable set of characteristics to have. Why does everybody have a Peter Pan in their life?
That's a good question. Why do they keep them, right? Because why do they keep them around? Very good question. Very good question. And sometimes many of them.
I mean, in my case, I mean, there are some people I know like that who I don't see that often, but when I do, they can be pretty fun because they are doing all this stuff that I, as a law student, am not going out to clubs on even on a monthly basis. But then every so often I'll get invited to Peter Pan's birthday party, and I'll be like, okay, I gotta go because it'll probably be a lot of fun. Of course, he does that every.
Yeah, so
every
maybe
weekend.
It's they do tend to be fun, right? And yeah, so they maybe you keep them around so you can at least once in a while be, on a par with Peter Pan
Mhm.
or Little Princess.
Well,
One.
maybe I'll call up Peter Pan and see what he's doing this weekend.
Yeah. Oh, maybe we'll call Little Princess and see what she's doing this weekend.
All right.
All right. So this was the Superhuman Minds channel. I'm Brit, and this is Kristian, and we'll talk to you next week.